Welcome back to another episode of Common Language Podcast, where we break down today's complex policy issues into easy to understand ideas, helping curious minds stay informed and engaged.
This week, we will be covering 3 recent headlines, including the conclusion of the Supreme Court's term, a fatal ICE shooting in Houston, and Trump's multi-billion-dollar earnings. As always, we'll be breaking down why these stories matter for you, what they reflect about our democracy, including the power shifts among the branches of government, polarization over immigration, and financial ethics for lawmakers. Mak, let's talk Supreme Court.
So let's get into it. So the Supreme Court also takes a summer recess. Theirs is a little bit longer than Congress's, who breaks in August. So they wrapped things up at the end of June. And it was one of their most consequential terms in recent years as they issued major decisions on executive authority, immigration, election law, and civil rights. They typically save a lot of the juiciest cases or the most controversial cases till the end of their term, which is why we got all of these big cases in the past couple of weeks that we're going to dive into. And so while several of these rulings strengthened presidential discretion in implementing federal policies and left some other contentious issues like birthright citizenship and voting access, the power to Congress and lower courts. So all in all, this term is expected to shape the balance of power between the executive branch, the judiciary, and Congress, heading into the 2026 midterm elections.
I know there were some wins for Trump and some losses.
The Voting Rights Act one, where they basically said that Louisiana doesn't have to, that they can gerrymander, essentially.
Yes, going back to gerrymandering and that ruling, only because I feel like it has been such a big topic in terms of how this midterms is going to shake out. There's just so much lead up to this that it does really feel as though Trump is trying to keep all his ducks in a row as best as he can, and he's tried to have so much control specifically over the Supreme Court. Let's not forget when they disappoint him, he punishes them. So it's just been a real fine line this year. I don't know. I feel like you have better touch on this, Mak.
Yeah, it's the Supreme Court's relationship to Trump, especially given how many of them were his own nominations and the dynamic that creates between the judiciary and the current executive branch is fascinating, and seeing some of them break from him has been interesting. But I think there was 2 cases that stood out to me the most. One was the birthright citizenship, because this was such a big campaign issue for Trump. A lot of the core MAGA people were really wanting him to deliver on this. And I think that he showed to them that he was willing to have it all the way elevated to the Supreme Court level. He issued the executive order day one, and now it's played out in the courts, and they have determined that birthright citizenship is the law of the land.
Yeah.
But his own pick, Amy Coney Barrett, breaking from him, voting with the majority and with the liberal justices on this, but Clarence Thomas siding with Trump. No surprise there.
No surprise.
But still shaking my head. I think that was pretty impactful. And the other big one was essentially campaign finance law. And this kind of worked, I think, in favor of what Trump wanted, because they struck down federal limits on the amount of money political parties can spend in coordination with candidates. And so, again, we talked a lot about the ways that money has a role in elections and campaigns, and have spoken to why there needs to be more restrictions and policies around this issue. But I think this was one that went in favor of Trump. Like you said, I think he had some wins and also some losses dealt to him through these rulings. And so it'll be interesting to see what they take up next year.
Yeah, I think in former administrations, Supreme Court rulings didn't feel like a personal attack on the president in the ways in which these ones did. So, of course, the rulings are significant and they will have lasting effects. But I think the fact that it feels like a personal attack on him is yet again setting a new precedent in the way that we do law in this country. Because, like you mentioned, with Amy Coney Barrett, she broke with Trump a few times this year, and he really takes it so personally. So it just begs the question of, we are in the court of law. It's not really personal. It's really business. and legal matters. Can we get backed? I don't know. Okay. So next topic is the ICE facility shooting in Houston. So a shooting at an immigrations and custom enforcement facility in Houston renewed debate over political violence, immigration enforcement, and security at federal facilities. An ICE officer fatally shot Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, a Mexican national who lived in the U.S. for decades, as the home builder drove his construction crew to a Houston job site. His death sets off protests in Texas's largest city and calls from Democrats and Salgado Araujo's family for an independent investigation. This shooting marks the 8th death during the Trump administration's enforcement campaign. The Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE, said federal officers were looking for someone else when they attempted to stop Salgado Araujo's vehicle. The incident has prompted renewed discussions about threats facing federal employees and the increasingly polarized political environment surrounding immigration policy. I'm so sad to have to say this yet again, and I do feel that unfortunately, the last government shutdown that we reported was totally short of putting policy in place and holding ICE accountable. The Democrats completely fell short in achieving their goals on that. And now here we are having another incident. And there was no cameras on this officer, so we don't have the footage. It's a mess. So what do you think, Mak, about this incident and where we really need Congress to go in terms of oversight on DHS or ICE?
Yeah, I feel like it's always what are we doing here kind of thing, because one of the conditions that the Democrats were fighting for was the body cameras.
Right.
And to see that kind of got a little bit lost here. What will the repercussions be for this? Will there be consequences? Will there be accountability? How will this change going forward? And I feel like it's interesting because I think maybe it's because it's still breaking and there is still investigations and information being collected. And it's just the summertime, so the news cycle is just a little bit different in the summer. But I do feel like the fatal shootings that we covered at the hands of ICE earlier in the year got a lot more attention and a lot more noise. And it was just like calls for people to resign, really people like drawing a line in the sand. But I feel like the Democrats there's been a loss of leverage and positioning here. And I don't know if that's because it just seems like there is no path forward or there is some other barrier in the way. But we keep having to, unfortunately, like you said, report on similar incidents over and over again. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of accountability. So to be honest, I don't even really know what the answer is here. Like, where do we go from here? And honestly, to that point, it reminds me of the National Guard and their continued presence in DC. It has like now been a full year and they are honestly, I feel like I've seen them ramp up a lot more in the city. And so that's been interesting. And it's just like, when will things change? When will we see a change?
Yeah. No, I agree. And what is ultra concerning too is the last thing we want is to start getting desensitized to this too. And I think that's the track that we're headed when you talk about less coverage and less action happening and less action being demanded. It's very unfortunate, the whole situation, and it clearly could have been avoided. The one other thing I wanted to mention too was the president of Mexico is actually planning on suing the U.S. for the death of Mexican nationals on their behalf. So I do feel like there is outrage coming from other places. It's unfortunate that we don't have that same level of accountability with our government. Not saying that the Mexican government is great by any means. However, it just feels like, how low are we going to go? In addition to the depths that we've already gone on so many other issues and topics this year. I'm very much hoping we don't have to keep reporting on this, but I think that feels like wishful thinking at this point.
I think, unfortunately, it is wishful thinking because it goes back to just how systemic of an issue this is, because I do think at the root of it, and I don't know how much we talked about this the last time we covered ICE, but I don't think we really got on it, that the creation of this department, it's not serving its intended purposes. Essentially, there's really a mismatched mission and implementation of what this agency is doing. and it actually needs to be like completely redone. And that's why we have all these problems around accountability, oversight, enforcement, etc., because at the root, it's just there's no alignment in policy and agency implementation and leadership. And so I think this, once again, just underscores that point and why total reform is needed.
Yeah, it's giving big corporation for sure.
Yeah.
No one knows who's in charge. No one knows what they're doing. Okay, Mac, let's talk about President Trump's income this year while we're on the topic of trashing him.
Yes. So, recent financial disclosures have indicated that President Trump reported approximately a $2.2 billion with a B dollar income. And this was driven mostly by holdings in real estate, media ventures, licensing agreements, and investments, as well as some settlements in cryptocurrency. I think there's a lot of income streams and revenue sources contributing to $2 billion. But nonetheless, the disclosures have reignited debate over presidential financial transparency, ethics, conflicts of interest, and the relationship between private business interest and public office. People who are in support of the president and his ability to generate income as he pleases argue that the disclosure in the first place demonstrates the president's business success and his acumen, while critics are concerned that this actually underscores the need for stronger ethics and disclosure requirements. And I think what's also interesting here is that this earnings report is essentially tenfold of any previous earnings in both Trump 1 and Trump 2. What do you make of him making all of this money? And do you think it's a problem?
I think that it's gross. And I think it's also just further justification for why he's not equipped to be the president. Because if you are in a position to be of public service, this should not be your mission. I don't care about your business success. We have far larger issues that everyday Americans are facing. Also, the fact that he made this much money as the president is just very problematic, too. I just think it's so layered. We've seen Trump knew his business deals, and clearly he's manipulating the markets. He doesn't care, but I think it just really sucks to watch him get richer while everyone else is not experiencing the same bounty. And in fact, he's made it more challenging for a lot of marginalized communities to even stay afloat. So I think it's pretty gross and egregious of him to even exist, yet here we are.
Yeah. It's also honestly hypocritical, and I know there are some nuances here between the stock trading and the ways he has generated income for himself. But I do think the same argument can be made. He, as we covered during the State of the Union, really pressed for the congressional stock trading ban, saying that members who are in office who have access to information shouldn't be able to trade stock and make money. But the same goes for the ways he's making money through things like real estate. It may not be like a stock, but you clearly have insider information. Cryptocurrency is another one, I think, how he's made his money. I think that still is an unfair advantage.
Not to mention the quid pro quo here. You think that someone is going to say no to him from a business perspective at this point? He'll bury them. This is like an HR nightmare is what it is. He needs to take that course.
Yeah.
He needs to take that video and learn no quid pro quo allowed.
I seriously wonder if they make him do that, because I know for staffers, you have to do it. Like most people who have a job, corporate, you have to do these ethics trainings. But same extends for Hill staffers, right? You have to do these ethics trainings. And literally one of the questions is ensuring that you understand the concept of quid pro quo, because that is illegal. So I'm curious if he's doing these assessments and quizzes and trainings the same way the staffers are, but I highly doubt that. And again, to your point, Case, just like it's very in contrast to where so many Americans are right now in this economy and their inability to afford things like housing, food, gas. It's egregious in that sense. It's just a clear problem to see our president's making this much money, but the average American is struggling so much. There's just such a huge disconnect there for me, which it's like all signs are pointing to this feels wrong.
Trump making his biggest salary of his lifetime as our president, yeah, I take a major offense to that. That's like a slap in the face to all Americans. We're not focusing on the right thing, period.
Yeah. Also, if he's doing that well in his personal business, while all of our economic indicators are pointing in the opposite direction, wouldn't you make the argument that his energy and efforts are not for the American people, but more so for himself right now?
Yeah, is he doing his job? Doesn't sound like it. Not to mention the fact that if he's making that much money, let me see your tax statements. That's what I want to see next.
Yeah.
Are you paying all the taxes? Because you just told us how much money you made. Let's see your taxes.
A big chunk of this income is from settlements like the one he made with the IRS. And they're not allowed to investigate him on things, apparently, on matters of income and taxes. So questions that need answers, but don't know if we'll get them.
Yeah. No one hold their breath for the answer.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Anyway, that about rounds up our 3 news stories for this week. Don't forget to leave us a review if you like, and also tell us what you want to hear more of. We're always here to support, and thank you all for listening.
Bye.
Bye.